Hello, welcome to another episode of Teddy Spin-Offs. Today we're going to do a lot of fun stuff. Get out! I'm not 10 anymore. Hi, I'm Patrick. Been wanting to make videos again for a while, and this seems like good as way to start as any. Show called Once Upon a Time. One of my favorite shows of all time, and also undoubtedly one of the weirdest, most terrible, and honestly the internet has a very weird relationship with it. So, while the show is popular on most social media, most websites, it is not very popular on sites like YouTube. And a lot of the videos that did exist either straight up make up lies or fundamentally misunderstand the show. I mean, I love you, Alex, but I think you screwed up here in specific. So, I wanted to be the first person to talk about Once Upon a Time in depth, but recently, over the past year or so, some people have made really good videos about Once Upon a Time. So, wouldn't my videos be redundant? No, I don't think so. Because I think I bring a very unique perspective to the table. I'm a long-time fan of the show, and I've rewatched the show so many times, so I know it inside and out. And I want to talk about it to you, to everyone. So, let's talk about the show. I will be recording a video on every season of the show, from season 1 to 6. I might do the Wonderland spin-off or the Hyperion Heights spin-off, but I've only really seen the latter. I mean, I call myself a super fan, but yeah, I've only seen this one. This video will obviously be on season 1, as you always start at the beginning, don't you? Season 1 is, in a lot of people's opinion, the best season. It is how everyone knows the show. A bunch of fairy tale characters are trapped in the real world under a curse, forget who they really are. And that's just it, right? That's the show. No, actually, it's just this first season. Yeah, it's just this first season that starts the trend. The rest of the seasons are about the fairy tale characters doing fairy tale things, but in this one, it's a mix. This season feels much more real than all the others, having it have a very different feel. It has kind of the same structure, but the structure works the best here than in any other season. No exceptions. Do I think season 1 is the best season? No, and we'll get to that in one of my future videos. You can guess what it is in the comments if you want to. I'll give you a clue. It's not season 4. Boy, is it not season 4. Now, we're going to talk about the plot of the season. I'm not going to go episode by episode. I don't think that's my style. I'm just going to go from beginning to end of his serialized story. From when Emma comes into town to when the curse is broken. So the series begins with Prince Charming kissing Snow White and waking her up, We all know that story. It's different here. So then begins with the evil queen crashing their wedding and telling them that everything they love will be taken away from them. They don't know what they mean yet. But then it cuts to a kick-ass woman who is confronting a guy, a really shady guy, who we never see again. And yeah, pretty good introduction for our main protagonist. In fact, this first episode is amazing. And then the boy she gave up for adoption comes in, lies to her face, and well, she has to take him home because of him threatening her. Meanwhile, in flashbacks, well, what appears to be flashbacks, Snow and Charming go to see the evil wizard Rumpelstiltskin, who makes a deal with them so they can learn about the Queen's threat. He seems to know everything. This is a great introduction to one of the main villains, and a very great character, played magnificently by the great Robert Carlyle. This episode, like every other episode of the show, is juxtaposed with present day and flashbacks. This is a format which is used in other shows, but this show uses it to a great extent. And with a few exceptions, this is how every episode of the show takes place. Even though it makes the most sense to use here, for reasons which I will talk about later in the video. So when Emma gets home, she meets Henry's adoptive mother, Regina Mills, who is the mayor of a town called Storybrooke. She finds out Henry has a book, and he believes all the stories in it are real, and his mother is the evil queen, and Emma is the one who will save everyone. We as the viewer know at this point Henry is right, but none of the characters do. Emma does not believe him, but she still sees that Regina is a very harmful mother. The next day, Henry has ran away from home, and Emma works with Regina and the sheriff, Graham, to find him. She instead finds a credit card which belongs to a teacher called Mary Margaret Blanchard, who Henry believes is Snow White, Emma's mother. They find Henry, and seeing how much Regina does harm to him, Emma decides to stay in Storybrooke just for a week. Definitely just for a week. This escalates quite quickly as we see Emma and Regina develop a very, very long feud where Regina keeps coming at Emma, most of the time successfully, framing her for stealing files, which Emma responds by cutting her apple tree down. The thing which really sets her off is, well, tricking her into settling things, which is like the easiest way to piss someone off. Pretend to be nice to them, but reveal it was all a trick. This obviously does not last. So, meanwhile, Henry finds a man in a coma. this man, he believes, is Snow White and therefore Mary Margaret Blanchard's long lost husband, Prince Charming. So he and Emma get Mary Margaret to read him the book so he can remember who he is and wake up. And it works! Surprisingly enough to them. But considering it worked, his wife enters the room. And while he has amnesia, he is also married. Never works out for lovers, does it? So Emma's busy trying to get Henry's beliefs in place as he goes through great extents to prove it, while David can't handle not being with Mary Margaret and starts an affair. And now we are at episode 7 of the season. Episode 7 is a very hard episode to talk about for a lot of reasons. There's a lot of debate about it, which I won't get into because this is not the video for that. But I will acknowledge it's a hard thing to talk about. What happens in this episode? Now, this episode is hard to sift through. I think it's great, but the implications are not. Like at all. So, Emma gains her deputy badge and works under the Sheriff Graham, who Emma then finds out is sleeping with Regina. But he says he doesn't feel anything with her. Why is he with her? Well, let's see. So, Emma convinces... So, Graham kisses Emma. And this makes him see visions, hallucinations, a wolf, and stuff like the referral of Snow White. In flashbacks, it reveals that Graham is the huntsman. We all know who he is. He's the person who was sent by the evil queen, a vicious killer, who, in the moment, spared Snow White's life because he took pity on her. Here, it was a different story. Here, she literally yanked his heart out and added it to her collection. Now, you're probably wondering, wait, how is he still alive? His heart is in his body. Well, in this universe, you can live without a heart. Sort of. You don't have to have it inside your body, but you can still live without one. It's a little strange, but let's just go with it. So yeah, Regina takes his heart out, and now he has to do everything she says. Or she kills him by crushing his heart into sand. I told you this show was weird. And then Graham goes to Mary Margaret, who is clearly under a spell to him. And then he goes to Henry, who tells him that he's a huntsman. And, well, all the true stuff about his life, which he believes. Emma catches up to him and decides to go with him to find his heart, just to indulge him. Of course, they do not find it, but we do find a safe as Regina follows them, and apparently it's her father's grave. As Emma and Regina have a vicious fight, Graham breaks it off with her, and thus Regina gets his heart out and crushes it. Graham dies in episode 7, very early into the show. Before this point, he was credited and acted like a series regular, especially like Emma's main love interest. So his death was a surprise to a lot of people. It was supposed to be the first big twist of the show, and it's supposed to be a sad moment. It's not that great, as Graham didn't really have any character until this episode, but it kind of makes sense, you know? He has no heart, he feels no emotion. How could you give this guy any character? We see his character mostly in this episode, in flashbacks. It's a really good exploration of the show's strengths. I mean, some issues, but what are you gonna do? Series regular dying in the first 7 episodes, or someone you think is going to be a series regular, isn't that unheard of? There's been times where they've tricked you that a character's going to be a main character, but they die very quickly. Woo! But it's not always the same. Let's continue with a review and what we get onto it, because Graham's death shapes the rest of the series, even if he only appears in flashbacks 2 more times. But he's played by a famous actor, so what you gonna do? So, as deputy, Emma becomes the sheriff, or so she thinks, as Regina almost immediately takes her job from her. Mr. Gold, however, finds a loophole in the town charter to give Emma her job back. So they have an election. Mr. Gold sets up a fake fire in Regina's office so Emma can save Regina after her reputation is ruined. Is ruined by Regina's newspapers. That Henry was born in prison. And then Emma stands up to Mr. Gold and tells everyone the truth at the debate, which actually wins her the vote, as no one likes Mr. Gold. And it turns out this was Mr. Gold's plan all along. So as I was saying, Mary Margaret and David are starting an affair. And it takes a while to finally tell David's wife, Catherine. In that moment, it is decided that everything is not going to be okay, as Catherine leaves the town. The next day, she's missing. Somehow her car crashed at the end, as Henry says, no one can leave Storybrooke without bad things happening to them. After a few days, they find out Catherine supposedly died, and Mary Margaret gets the blame for her murder, and it becomes hard to prove her innocent. But they eventually relents. And while Emma tries to prove that Regina set Mary Margaret up, Catherine suddenly turns up fully alive. in which everything is revealed. But Regina stabs her obsessed henchman in the back in order to avoid jail time herself, which she could easily do because she's the mayor, obviously. And then a stranger called August comes into the town, and after Emma threatens to take Henry away from Regina, he distracts her by trying to get Emma to believe in the curse, but Emma still doesn't care. Some people say that they would have believed by now that about the fairy tales. I mean, this town is so weird. What Henry says is clearly right. And multiple parties, unbiased, have all told Emma the same thing. Yet, she still says that it's all not true. Which, believing in fairy tales, what will get you to believe that? Because there's some pretty good evidence here. I'm not sure if I personally will believe that. I'm a bit of a skeptic, so I'm not sure what would eventually get me to believe this. But this, plus Emma being the saviour, it makes sense why. Even if you don't think, there's no way anyone would stop believing now, Emma herself makes sense. She's never been of any importance in her 28 years of life. So why would she be important now? She believes she's their only hope, then, well, they're screwed because Emma does not believe in it herself. This does make her a classic reluctant hero, which we'll talk about in a bit, but let's get to it. So, now we get into the final stretch, and the finale. Without a doubt, the best finale the show has ever had. And it's not my favourite season, but it has my favourite finale. You know what I mean? So, Regina wants to get rid of Emma for good. So she hires someone to basically find the apple which she used to make Snow White sleep. Which she has more confidence would work in this world because there's less of magic to wake her up, and Emma does not have any love interests yet. We don't, after Graham, we don't get another one until season 2, so we'll have to wait for that. So, but Emma's leaving Storybrooke that day, and when Regina Biggs will turn over, Henry eats it. And he gets put under the sleeping curse. This freaks them both out, and Emma finally believes him. And feels so guilty that she didn't do it before. Emma has to fight a fucking dragon to get Emma to wake Henry up, which she eventually does, which finally breaks the curse. So there we go. There's the main plot of Once Upon a Time. Now, we've talked about that. I missed out a few details, but we've talked about it. Let's get into the characters. First, let's talk about everyone's favourite character, Regina. Now, this is a weird iteration of Regina. She is deliciously played by Lana Parrilla. And she is undoubtedly the main villain of the season. And she is usually portrayed as pure evil. But this goes in contrast to all the other seasons of the show, obviously, as Regina's redemption story is both famous and infamous within the fandom. But this season doesn't really seem to support the idea that this woman can be redeemed. With a couple of exceptions, it's actually inconsistent on whether she actually cares for Henry, or is just using him for her own selfish means. But she does have vulnerable moments, like in the finale. She definitely cares for Henry in the finale. There is the Stable Boy, her focus episode, which focuses on the backstory with her abusive mother. But a lot of very unsympathetic villains have tragic backstories. So I don't actually think this means that much in the grand scheme of things. It's just saying, hey, this is how this woman became evil. Her mum was even more evil. We'll talk about Cora more in the next video. But you kind of get what I'm saying here. This is a weird iteration of Regina, and if you go back to it, it definitely is. Then there's, of course, Emma, who you should obviously know the whole deal about. We've talked about her throughout this video, as she is the main protagonist throughout all of the main series. Here, I think Emma works the best as a classic reluctant hero. It's very different, as she doesn't even believe what's going on. As, no one's ever cared for her. We don't actually see any backstory of Emma in this season. She is the protagonist of present day, but she only really appears in flashbacks as a baby. This makes sense, as all flashbacks are set in Venture Forest, meant to expand upon what happened before the curse. Strangeness. But I do like this Emma. She's very snarky, very over the top, very sympathetic hero, in contrast to Regina, in which their rivalry is utterly fantastic. Jennifer Morrison is also really good here. Otherwise, while in later seasons, she isn't. But I do like this. I like how Emma is a great character. Then, of course, we have the classic Snow and Charming, usually abbreviated to just Snowing by shippers of them like myself. I know it's an unpopular opinion, but Snowing gets some great development here. They are a fantastic couple, and their romance makes sense. I haven't seen the original Snow White, but I hear that her and the prince barely get any development. Hell, the prince never even gets a name. Here, he definitely does. And he is fantastic. And, I've got so much to say. But because while every other season refers to them by these names for some stupid reason, this is the only season where we actually get to see the characters of Mary Margaret Blanchard and David Nolan, aka the cursed versions of Snow White and Prince Charming. They are great, as it does seem that they are separate from the characters. Mary Margaret is very likable. We really get the sense that she doesn't know what's going on and stuff. While Snow White is fierce, she fights for herself, it's clear Mary Margaret is more vulnerable and scared, and Emma changes her and gives her some self-confidence. Now, some people have said that her punishment doesn't really make much sense. Wouldn't she be more harsh on her? And that kind of makes sense, but there are a few things which I think is fine. For one, she's not happy. She's somewhat satisfied, but she's clearly lonely. And that changes with Emma. She's clearly had the best time of her life when she spends time with her best friend. And let's talk about David. David is an unlikable asshole a lot of the time, and he's just self-pitying. I don't care about him. I'm not sure what you're supposed to think, but this guy and Prince Charming are completely different people. This guy is horrible to Mary Margaret, and even more horrible to his wife. Why are we supposed to feel anything for him? Oh yeah, because he's Prince Charming and he's going to change back in the end. I don't know. Like, seriously, you actually think Mary Margaret is and you claim to love her. Obviously he leaves, and this character basically dies. So I'm not that bad about. I'm not feeling that bad about it, but he is annoying in the moment. Then we have Henry, the child character played by Jared S. Gilmore. He's an interesting character. I like his dynamics with both Emma and Regina, and I like that he's the kid who set it off. Some have said that, like, 10's a bit too old for this character to believe in things, but he believes in things because it makes sense to him. This town has been frozen in time, basically all his life. The town he's lived in, the people in it. He obviously hasn't understood it. Regina is pretty stupid if she thought that she was going to hide this from Henry for his entire life. I mean, that is very unrealistic. So, this isn't Henry's best season, but I certainly do like this Henry. He's simple, you could spend time with him, see what he likes and dislikes. He's just a very cute kid, you know? I would like to see more of this Henry. And then, of course, there's my favourite character, Rumpelstiltskin, aka Mr. Gold. This guy is amazing. Regina fans might tell you that Regina isn't the main villain of this season, Rumpel is. And I don't think that's an entirely wrong view to have, but Regina instigates, like, most things in the season. Emma and Regina's rivalry is the big part. Regina is the one who arranges for him to meet. I know Rumpel is part of it, but I do think that it is mostly this. His focus episodes give him a lot more sympathy than Regina, give him more openness to change. He has much more selfless motivations. Hell, you can argue his motivations are wanting to redeem himself for what he did to his son. This obviously changes in later seasons where he is given much less sympathy than Regina, but here it's very different. And while he does act more evil than Regina, he's definitely a much more interesting character. And again, he's played magnificently by Robert Carlyle, a very famous actor who I love. A lot of people do. His deals, he is one of the glue that keeps a lot of things together. But we'll talk about that when we get to the secondary characters. So, you already really talked about Graham, and there's not much to say about him outside of what we talked about. So I won't dwell on him. I just have to say that he's a fine character for what he does. I don't think he's meant to be that interesting. I just think that we're supposed to feel for him and Emma, and basically his relationship to her. He's a fine love interest for Emma. That's basically all I have to say. Again, there's not that much to go into with this guy. Then we have August Booth, aka The Stranger. He enters a little later into the season, episode 9, after Graham had left. And you could argue he is kind of Emma's love interest after Graham left, but I never really got that vibe, you know. It doesn't see... He was much more of a friend to Emma, and he was working with her for selfish gains. I think it's a missed opportunity. That's because he's barely used after this season. We'll talk about this more in the season 2 video of how he was one of the many neglected characters of Once Upon a Time. But this guy is Pinocchio. That's supposed to be a twist. They really got me fooled that this was Rumpel's son, because the truth about this guy doesn't come out until episode 20. Like 11 episodes into how he was supposed to appear. He is credited as a series regular, which is why I'm putting him here. And he does do more in this season than a lot of the secondary characters, which I will talk about soon. But there's not that much to say. He's a fairly interesting character, especially in his last few episodes. We see a lot of his done. His backstory episode is fantastic. And I really think Geppetto is an awful father. And that does not get said enough. He is an awful father. He sets his 7-year-old boy into the world and forces him to look after a baby. And he just thinks it's all going to be okay. Seriously. Well, you can argue that Mary Margaret and David do the same thing, where they send the baby into the thing. But she was supposed to be the saviour. This is kind of understandable. She was supposed to be the one who saves. So it's much more understandable. But Geppetto was just being very selfish. I mean, he didn't even know that he would turn back into wood. And I also hate how the Blue Fairy goes along with this, but the Blue Fairy is another deal. No one likes her. No one likes the Blue Fairy, and I don't care. There's a lot of bad stuff she did, and we'll talk about that secondary characters part. And then finally we have Archie Harper, who I'm only counting here because he was credited, even though I do consider him a secondary character. He is credited in the main cast, despite only appearing in 9 out of the 22 episodes. I don't know why. He is Henry's therapist. He gets one of his own episodes in episode 5, and then does absolutely nothing for the rest of the season. Absolutely nothing. It seems like they're setting him up to be a really interesting character. They just do nothing with him for the rest of the season, and by extension for the rest of the entire series of the show. He's just a regular therapist, which it would be fine if he was just that for like the entire show. But alas, he's not. They gave him his own episode, and they should have done more with him if they wanted us to believe that he was a main character. Now, next we'll talk about the secondary characters, most notably characters that got their own episode in this season. Most of these characters are only really relevant in the season 1 rundown, as they don't appear much in other seasons or in the case of a few of these characters, don't appear at all. Even though some of these are pretty prominent secondary characters. Now, let's begin. First, we have Ashley Boyd, aka Cinderella. This is another example of wasted potential. Cinderella is the most famous fairy tale of all time. I think that's without question. And Once Upon a Time, which is supposed to be a fairy tale crossover, completely wasted. That the spin-off had to fix that, where it basically rewrote their entire version of Cinderella. They kind of merged this version of Cinderella with Rumpelstiltskin, where they kind of merged Cinderella with the Miller's Daughter, which is kind of weird. Again, she's set up to be a big character in that episode, but that is her biggest appearance in the series. She only makes one appearance after season 1, where her only point is to give Mary Margaret more confidence in her relationship with David, which doesn't really have long-lasting consequences. Then the rest of the series just gets a cameo in season 4, which I didn't even catch until I looked it up. And her own episode in season 6 returns, which is very jarring, but we'll talk about that when we finally get to season 6. Overall, I don't think she's a bad character. She's just another example of wasted potential in this show, which again is a whole lot. Then we have Hansel and Gretel, two characters which also the spin-off entirely rewrote, because they only appear in this episode and never again. Their episode is good, but it's weird looking back in hindsight because it puts so much focus on these two characters which never happen again. This episode will really just be using these two kids to further Emma's character arc. But since they make them Hansel and Gretel, it doesn't really feel like they should be guest characters. But it's a fairy tale show. I guess two characters being guest characters doesn't make sense. But considering they pair it with flashbacks, I really thought this was going to be more. Maybe they couldn't get the child actors back, or something was happening with the rights. I don't know. But the point is, they only appear in this one episode, so we don't have to dwell on them too much. And now there's Sydney Glass, aka the Magic Mirror, aka, get this, the Genie of Agrabah. He is played by popular actor Giancarlo Esposito, as you can probably see. I haven't seen him in anything else, but apparently he's been in a lot of things, and he's just been confirmed to appear in a Marvel movie, which is pretty good. Now, again, he does much more than Archie this season, which is why I think he would deserve a main character billing more. He basically acts as Regina's willing henchman for the entire for the season, where he clearly has a big crush on Regina, which is how he became the Magic Mirror in the first place. He was absolutely obsessed with Regina, and when Regina rejected him, he wished that he would always be there with her, so magic turned him into a mirror. You can argue that, well, he's not with Gina every second in the storybook, obviously, but magic doesn't exist in the storybook, so I think it's just perfectly reasonable that the spell broke. And when magic came back to storybook after season 1, it didn't really go that much. It was already broken, so it stayed broken. I think it kind of made sense to me at that point. Although the spell itself is also really weird, but I don't think we'll get into that. He's good enough for what he is. He's your standard willing henchman who's obsessed. There's not really that much to talk about. So yeah, he's a secondary character who gets quite a bit of development. Then we have Belle, who I'm not going to dwell on because I don't think we need to. She becomes the main character later, so I'm going to talk about her more in the seasons 2 through 6 reviews. But I guess she just get her own episode, so people might be disappointed if I don't talk about her here. She doesn't do much again. She only makes 3 appearances. One is the finale and one is her own episode. So, again, she doesn't really do much. And the next 2 characters we're going to talk about do way more. Again, I don't really want to talk about it that often. They do the standard Beauty and the Beast thing, but with Rumpelstiltskin as the Beast. And this is one of the most healthy portrayals of their relationship. As if you go on about how Beauty and the Beast, that movie is Stockholm Syndrome, you haven't seen this show because even the most staunch critics could believe that this isn't this. But we'll talk about that more in other reviews. So, again, I'm not going to dwell on her here. I think it's a good twist that she was revealed to be still alive at the end. I'll just say that. But that's enough for now. Then we have Grumpy, also called Dreamy, also called Leroy. While he does appear in every season, it's always a supporting character. This is the only season where he gets his own episode, which I wish this episode was followed up on because it's the most notable appearance of the Blue Fairy acting like an asshole, aside from when she straight up lied to Rumpel that the only way to get back to Storybrooke was through get back to his son was through a curse. That was... Never mind. I'm not going to fully go into the Blue Fairy here. She never gets her own episode in the show. I'm just going to rant about her through other characters until I do my own video after I've done all the seasons on why she's awful. But that episode was pretty great. I liked how it dwelled on the forbidden love aspect of how in that world fairies weren't forbidden to love, but dwarves were. In this world, it's the other way around, as novice and none. I like the juxtaposition. It's one of my favourite episodes of the show. And I would like it even more if he became a bigger character. They gave this dwarf some depth, while the other dwarfs barely even get a line in. While Leroy is called Leroy for the entire show, none of the other dwarves are called by their cursed names. We only know 2 of them, but the others we never even see, and they're always credited as co-starring. So they're extremely minor characters, and I think they're wasted. But I won't dwell on that. This video is long enough as it is. So, yeah, that's what I think of Grumpy / Dreamy / Leroy. Also, I do like the downfall and how he became Grumpy the Dwarf. I like that backstory. Okay, we'll stop now. Yeah? Red really shouldn't be here in my opinion, as I think she is the definition of a fake guest star in this season. But because she does do quite a bit. She's the catalyst of... She's Axis Snow's best friend in flashbacks. But yet most of her appearances are in the background, so I guess she does do more in season 2. But I think she works well here as the waitress and as Snow's best friend in flashbacks. She doesn't actually do much in present day aside from her focus episode though, where she is portrayed as a fairly sympathetic character. therefore we don't actually see that much of Ruby as a whole. Cursed. But I do like her when she is shown. I like her relationship with Granny. I like the big twist where, if you didn't know this already, they do a good twist on a Red Riding Hood story, where they don't do a twist of where the wolf wasn't bad actually. They do a very different twist. It's a werewolf. And guess who the werewolf is? Red Riding Hood herself. And the hood is the thing which stops her from being a werewolf. This is a fantastic twist on the story and is one of my favourites. And it's continued, it's stuck with, it has lasting consequences in season 2 mostly. And she does use her wolf power to fight. It's not considered a flaw. And I like it. I really, really like it. So there's not much to say other than that, but I'll talk about Ruby more when I get to season 2. Right now, that is enough said about her. And then last, but certainly not least, we have Jefferson, played by, as you can see, Sebastian Stan. This is the most underused character in Once Upon a Time, but unlike most characters, it's not the show's fault. Obviously, they were never going to keep this guy on long term, especially as his MCU character boosted in popularity. If you're wondering, this was actually after he was in the MCU. This was after Captain America the First Avenger came out, but before anything else. Jefferson is a very popular character, despite only appearing in 6 episodes. I'm not sure if I'll talk about him in the Season 2 video. I'll probably give him a passing mention, but he does much more here. He is the person Regina hires to get the stuff. He is the Mad Hatter. And in this universe, the Mad Hatter is a traveller who travels between the realms. And Regina hires him. And his backstory is he has to stay separated from his daughter as a punishment. He had the harshest punishment in the entire cast, which is kind of weird. You'd think that would happen to Snow, but no, Jefferson 100% gets it. I do love Jefferson. He is a very interesting and very good interpretation of Mad Hatter. You see throughout the show, they have different versions of the characters. That episode Hat Trick is great, and it does have need for the show. I think the writers and the creators had big plans for Jefferson. It was just clear they couldn't hold on to Sebastian Stan. And it's kind of disappointing, even though I do love Bucky. Don't get me wrong. I just think in like the alternate universe where Bucky was played by someone else, Sebastian Stan would have probably stuck with this show. Jefferson probably would have become a big character, maybe even a series regular. It's kind of disappointing that never happened, as he is one of the most interesting secondary characters the show has ever had. But I've talked about him enough, and I think it's finally time to end this segment. So there we go then. That is my Season 1 review of Superfan of the show. I love doing this, especially the character portion. I was not expecting this to be this long. If you watch this far, congratulations, because this is probably a terrible video because it's my first video and everyone hates their first videos. You probably only watched it because because you're a fan of the show. So I highly doubt So I don't know why I was describing it to people who had like never seen it, because you're not going to, or unless you stumbled upon the YouTube videos which were made about it before. But I think that I've done a good job on this video. Now, so let me down in the comments, see what you think, and like and subscribe, I guess. But I do like how this series is going, and season 2 will be out in a couple of weeks. I will not be doing 7 videos in once a time in a row. This YouTube channel is going to talk about more than that. These will undoubtedly be much longer videos than the other videos on the channel, but this channel is mainly for talking about media which not many people remember. And once upon a time, while it doesn't fall into that category anymore, is still something I've always wanted to talk about. I think I did a good job here. So stay tuned for the season 2 video, which will hopefully be a lot shorter than this one, but I can't promise anything. Season 2 is a very interesting season. You can split it up into 3 parts. So I hope you enjoyed this video, but I'm going to assume you didn't. So I'll see you later.